Ms. Hunter had a couple of things that she wanted to discuss with the board, so we wanted to give her the opportunity to do so.
Okay. I had just, so much is going on in our world in general, but this is just not a black-white situation. I think that we, as a board, should come to some kind of agreement. I am writing the Secretary of Education because I think that there's not enough diversity. And, I was thinking about, like, we've had Mexicans come to the school, might have had Indians, Indian background. And if the only thing they were taught about their heritage, like say for example the Indians, all they're taught in a book is that the cowboys killed the Indians. That is sad. But anyway, so talking about racism, I just think that we really need to recognize this, and like I said, not just black and white, it's black, brown, red, yellow skin, and to make sure that it does not happen in our school system.
And I included something that came from the Board of Education, and they on June 18, 2020, and that packet that has James Lane, the second page back, on page 2 of the document, the Virginia Board of Education on June 18, 2020 adopted unanimously the following statement regarding systemic racism and racial justice and education. The board remains committed to making good on the promise of a high-quality education for every child by eliminating racial and social and economic inequities in Virginia's public education system. And that resolution, which is right there, is talking about the history of people of color, and I think that's what you're saying as well. I didn't want to put words in her mouth, but I think the Board of Education took similar action. The board is committed to ensuring that Virginia students learn and understand the complex and untold history of Black Americans in our Virginia and our nation, reviewing standards of learning so that voices are heard during the revision process. Equal access to a high-quality public education is a fundamental right of all Virginians, regardless of race, gender, creed, color, or sexual orientation. However, systemic racism and discrimination still exist in public education, and too often a student's skin color or socioeconomic status predicts the quality of their educational opportunities. And as education leaders in the Commonwealth, we have a responsibility to recognize and confront such racism and discrimination. And that was an action they took on June 18th as the Board of Education for Virginia. So it's similar, but just a tad different than the resolution. But Mrs. Hunter, thank you for your comments.
Okay.
And anything else?
Any comments? Communication on the resolution?
I think I agree largely with what Ms. Hunter said. I think to me, when you talk about the racial struggles that we've had as a country since our founding, I think it's important to highlight the fact that that's not just particular to one group or another. As a matter of fact, a lot of the struggles that we've had as a country, I think, can be traced back to just the human experience overall. So it's difficult. I think one of the reasons why this is an uncomfortable topic is because it can kind of feed out into so many other discussions. And I think to Ms. Hunter's point, it's worthy for us to encourage the discussion, especially historically, of all the people that make up our country. I would just, when we discuss it and when we talk about it, especially in the context of what we're teaching our children.
Definitely.
I think an overarching sense of unity and being able, I think there is a portion of this resolution that I thought was very nice. I think it's at the beginning or at the end, but it talks about basically seeing people as individuals and respecting them regardless of their skin color. And I think if we stick to that message overall, I think is far more productive than some of the other things that I'm sure we have all heard bannered about, especially in the last several months. This is a tough conversation to have, but it's one that I think is worthy to have. So.
Now, when you had mentioned your concerns, Ms. Hunter, you talked about curriculum. That's what I heard as you were talking. So you are writing the Secretary of the State to talk about the curriculum and to introduce more of the history.
Right.
Okay. Of
every
Indians.
race.
Yes. Okay.
Because like I said, you're a little Indian girl sitting in
Right,
class.
right.
And they let you know this many were killed by the cowboys.
Right.
This many Indians. I mean, that could be a frightful thing. And to be truthful, the only thing I learned in my 12 years of education was concerning blacks, African Americans, was slaves came over to America, Martin Luther King, and that's probably about it. Rosa Parks, she said on her, but that was it. I mean, it didn't. And then there's one day that during Black History Month, we've told the kids, come up with someone from Black history, write a note about it, write up a paragraph or write up some information about that person. And I just didn't feel like that did justice, maybe because I'm Black, but I just think overall, when we're talking about a school, we have to remember there are all kinds of people that represent, and it takes a village, and that could be, like I said, white, yellow, black, red skin, to make it. So.
And I will say, just being a sub in the school system, you're definitely right. We could improve in it on what we're doing. We have implemented some things. I know we have multicultural days in the county as well as the city. We have Black History. Because of SOL requirements, we have to introduce the kids to more than Dr. Martin Luther King. I have taught some of those things in the school system, but you're right. Teaching on history, teaching unity and things of that nature is definitely, given the times we're living in, would
I think
would benefit us.
I apologize, I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's
I think
okay.
this discussion specifically about race and the contributions of other races of people, I think it has the same limitations as history overall. If you ask any history teacher, whether you're covering a specific period, say World War II or whatever, there's not enough instruction time to go over what a real history buff or a real student of that history would think that it should be covered. And I think schools have always faced that limitation no matter what we're trying to teach, especially with history, because history can have so many perspectives. Your view of history can be painted by your seat in the present. So we do have to be, I suppose, mindful to a certain degree of how realistic is it for us to cover the entirety of every angle of every historical event that may have happened. And I think, unfortunately, that includes something as important as the history of race and race relations in the country. So I don't know the answer to where that balance is, unfortunately. I don't know of any of us that do.
I think if we continue to expand on it,
Definitely.
it won't happen in one school year.
Right.
But if, individuals like Ms. Hunter want to write and suggest things, then as it moves on through time, we can continue to expand.
That seems like a good plan.
Well, I think that for our area, it's a true problem. Though we have had Mexicans join our community, and we've had Indian, we've had Asian families join our community, it's still so far and few between. The majority is white, and I don't think that people do it on purpose, but they do what they see on a daily basis. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because I grew up in the military, and I went to 14 different schools, and I like Erika, and so when you lived on a military base, you were indoctrinated into many different races and homes and sorts of things. So it was a little bit of a culture shock when we moved here, because you don't see a variety of people in the way you do in a bigger community. And that's where I think it's a disservice to our children, because they don't understand what it's like for someone else who doesn't look like them.
Definitely.
And that's something we really need to work on.
Okay, so we have before us the resolution on racism. Okay, has everybody had the opportunity to read it? Okay. Are there any discussion far as what it says?
Only whether or not you want to read the whole thing, or you want help, or you want help with it.
No, I will read it. Okay, let's read it. Okay. Whereas members of the Covington City School Board, as well as the Covington City Public School staffs, are saddened and outraged by recent events that demonstrate the prejudice and injustice that persists in our country. Whereas racism and hate have no place in our schools or our society, and we must protect the constitutional rights of every person who lives, works, and learns in our community. Whereas we cannot be silent, we urgently must act to stop the racial injustice that harms and anguishes Black people, who are our family, friends, neighbors, students, staff, members, and fellow Americans. Whereas we must listen, those who have endured discrimination and intolerance deserve to be heard as they share the stories and truth about their experiences and feelings. We must seek with great empathy to understand their challenges and their pain. Whereas we must learn, it is time to engage our community in meaningful and honest conversation about racial inequality, to build alliances with those committed to justice for all, and to work together to support our shared conviction that racism must end. Whereas we must lead, each of us individually and collectively is responsible for creating and nurturing an anti-racist learning environment where every child is respected and valued for who they are, regardless of their skin color. We must actively acknowledge, address, and prevent racial bias that occurs as a result of division policies, practices, and actions. And whereas we must do better, our school division can be and will be a sanctuary of safety in our community and a beacon of light for the world as we build and strengthen trust with those we serve, and we model the acceptance of all people. Therefore, be it resolved that we, members of the Covington City School Board, stand steadfast in our commitment to foster an inclusive educational environment where every student, teacher, support professional, parent, and community member is treated with dignity and respect, as well as our commitment to continue fighting for racial justice and human and civil rights for all. Approved by the Covington City School Board, this, I'm reading the old copy. You have today's date?
Oh, yes, 7th day. Yes, yeah.
7th day
Yeah.
of July 2020.
Yes, we have.
Okay. All right. So I will entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.